national security advisor is leaving his post in the cabinet after a row over adding a journalist to a group chat. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce was told the news by a reporter during a briefing within the last half an hour.
Mike Waltz is going to become the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, there you go.
No longer the National Security Advisor.
Fabulous.
And in addition to that, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor.
It is clear that I just heard this from you. The fact that is, which was obviously Truth Social. Yeah, so that is the miracle of modern technology and the social media. So that is an exciting moment here. I think that, as I know Secretary Rubio, this is a man who, as I think you all know, has worn several hats from day one.
A former Russian president claims a deal which will give the US access to Ukrainian minerals proves America has broken Kyiv. Putin ally Dmitry Medvedev says it's been forced to pay for American aid. President Zelensky had previously said he would be seeking security guarantees in return for the rare earths. Yuri Sak is an advisor to the Ukrainian government and told LBC he does believe it provides assurances.
There are no explicit security guarantees in this deal in a way that we were hoping there would be there, but this deal should be seen as part of a wider framework. And importantly, when the deal was signed, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in his statement, the signing of the deal signifies that the US is committed to a free, sovereign and prosperous Ukraine.
A 14-year-old boy is being questioned by police in connection with a double stabbing in Merseyside. A girl who's 14 and a 15-year-old boy was seriously injured in the attack in Kirkby. The FA says it's in touch with trans women about how they can stay in football. They're being banned from playing in the women's game in England after the Supreme Court ruled a woman is identified by biological sex. And Marks & Spencer has been forced to freeze recruitment as it continues to deal with a cyber attack. The company's pulled all online job adverts from its website. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 1 point to 84.96. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.17. LBC weather, a cool night in the north tonight, largely dry in southern areas and a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Very good evening. 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. It's another edition of Question Marks with Simon Marks. He is standing by live in Washington, D.C. for us. Simon, very good evening. Very coincidental that we should have you on when there's breaking news to talk about.
Well, I think at this point in Washington, you could have me on at any time of the day or night, and there would always be breaking news to talk about. It's just been another head-spinning day here in Washington, which, as you know, began about 9 hours ago now, 6 hours ago now, with the revelation at around 9 o'clock in the morning here that Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, was out. We didn't know if he was resigning, if he'd been fired. Multiple reports suggested that President Trump had decided to oust him and his deputy Alex Wong. Remember that Mr. Waltz and Mr. Wong were right at the centre of what has become known here as Signal Gate, the flap over the revelation that highly respected Washington journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, was inadvertently added to a group chat on the Signal messaging app, in which the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth revealed classified information pertaining to America's plans at the time to launch attacks on Houthi rebel positions in Yemen, which indeed went ahead, and Mr. Goldberg was able to observe news of that happening in real time in complete absolute symmetry with the war plans that had been laid out in that group messaging chat by Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth has survived. Many here wonder how that's possible, given the fact that he disclosed classified information and also other issues that have bedeviled him at the Pentagon. But it's Mike Waltz that is taking the fall, because Mike Waltz was the originator of all of this. He's the man who first reached out, for reasons we don't understand at all, to Mike Waltz, to Jeffrey Goldberg, the reporter, and asked to connect with him on the Signal app. So we all thought that's it for Mike Waltz. That's the end of his career. He will be able to return to his native Florida in relative obscurity. And then suddenly, within the last hour or so, we've had this message from Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform saying that actually Mike Waltz's career is not over, that he's planning to send Mike Waltz to New York to become the next US ambassador to the United Nations. There is a vacancy there because the original plan was to send Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, a Trump backer from New York, to the United Nations. That fell apart because the White House was worried that the Republicans might lose the by-election that would take place if she gave up her seat in Congress and moved to the United Nations. So Mike Waltz might solve a bit of a problem for Donald Trump at the United Nations. But what all this means for Marco Rubio, who is now adding interim national security advisor to his business card at the same time as serving as Secretary of State. Ian, you will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the first time that has happened since Henry Kissinger became the first person ever to occupy both roles at the same time in the Nixon administration. We've seen people who have served in both roles, but not at the same time. How long Marco Rubio takes on that additional burden, and how you do that, given, that the National Security Council is based at the White House and the State Department is its own separate power vertical, that's going to become a big challenge for him, I think.
And as Senator Lloyd Bentsen might have said, Marco Rubio is no Henry Kissinger.
Well, there is that, although I was just seeing the list of jobs that Marco Rubio now has. We heard in the news his spokeswoman Tammy Bruce being blindsided by the news during the course of her press briefing. She said he wears many hats. He does, because already, as well as being Secretary of State, he is the acting director of the US Agency for International Development. I mean, that can't take up very much time because Elon Musk basically eviscerated the US Agency for International Development, but there are still, I think, a couple of hundred employees left there in some kind of rump capacity. And he's also the acting archivist. I'm not quite sure what the acting archivist is, but I think that's something to do with the State Department. I need to go and look into that. I wasn't aware of that role until I just saw the list up on CNN. So he's going to have 4 jobs: National Security Advisor, Acting USAID Director, Acting Archivist, and now interim National Security Advisor on top of being Secretary of State.
Is this a dead cat?
In what sense?
Well,
in what
in the
sense?
sense that we're talking about this now, whereas we probably would have started off with the Ukrainian mineral deal if this hadn't happened.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, look, I think for any president of the United States to lose a scalp of the size of a national security advisor's scalp this early in his administration, certainly not what most presidents want. I mean, I think Donald Trump could be excused for feeling a sense of déjà vu about all of this, because remember, in his first term, he lost his first national security advisor, General Michael Flynn, after only 24 days. Mike Waltz at least got to 101, 102 days, depending on how you count these things. And it does create questions about Donald Trump's claim that he's surrounding himself with an ocean of competence in many of these government positions. I mean, the Signalgate scandal did reveal stunning incompetence on the part of many of his top officials. And as to who fills that role going forward, I mean, presumably Donald Trump will want someone with proven fealty to the Make America Great Again movement, which is why he's asking Senator Marco Rubio, at least temporarily, to fill both roles while he figures out what he's going to do over the long term.
He's come on a bit of a journey with Marco Rubio, hasn't he? I used to refer to him as Little Marco, and now he seems to be his biggest fan.
Absolutely. It's amazing. It's amazing what can happen in American politics.
And that's really the story of the first 100 days, isn't it? That I was saying to someone, I may have said it on the programme, I reckon 75% of my shows since January the 20th have featured at least 1 hour on Donald Trump, which was certainly, I wouldn't have intended to do that in January, but you can't ignore him, can you?
Well, you can't ignore him, Ian, because the stakes here in America and also for the UK are so high. This is not like the first Trump administration because there are no restraining influences around him. I mean, about the only adult in the room appears to be the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who signed that Ukraine, and I think it's not a minerals deal. I think it is, we can't call it that anymore. It is an economic cooperation pact with Ukraine yesterday. It's not even clear that Donald Trump knows what is in that agreement because Kiev is projecting this as a huge win for Ukraine and a huge black eye for Moscow, and certainly that's how the Kremlin currently appears to be reading it. So Scott Bessent is perhaps the last remaining adult in the room who might quietly, cautiously, carefully, not always obey all the instructions that Donald Trump gives him, whether it's on Ukraine and the minerals deal, the Economic Cooperation Pact, or whether it's on the trade war and tariffs. But the journey that we have all taken together over the last 100+ days is one that has seen the United States hit by a tsunami of executive actions, by a president who is trying to steamroller the constitutional checks and balances that exist here to protect American democracy, and who is also trying to lay waste to an 8-decade transatlantic relationship in which he has precious little interest. And so, you know, how can one ignore any of that? I think that's why all of us, whether you live here or whether you live over there, we're all pretty agog about what's taking place here and frankly worried about where it is taking the United States into the future.
Right, let's go to your calls. If you have a question for Simon, 0345 6060 973. Elliot is in Cheadle. Elliot, hi, what would you like to ask Simon?
Two questions that interlink, actually, Ian. Simon, you're ensconced in the US. Is Trump, in your opinion, is Trump's popularity in the USA waning? Has his luster dissipated after 100 days? And the second question I want to ask is, how far will the Republican Party be prepared to tolerate Trump and what he does before there is a dissension in the party, in the Republican Party, that causes them to instigate the removal of the president under the 25th Amendment?
Well, I think those are both great questions, Elliot. And as far as Trump's popularity is concerned, I mean, it's absolutely apparent from the raft of opinion polls that have been released around the 100-day anniversary of his arrival back in office that his numbers are sinking, and sinking pretty rapidly. I mean, in some polls, he's 8 points down on where he was in terms of his approval among voters only 5 or 6 weeks ago. So he's in the low 40% range in most of these polls. He denies it, of course. He said yesterday that legitimate polls, whatever he means by that, would show that his approval rating was 60 or 70%, but that is fanciful and fiction. And the only saving grace for Donald Trump in these opinion polls, he has the lowest approval rating of any American president since Gerald Ford in 1974 at the 100-day mark of his presidency. The only saving grace is that he's way more popular than Democrats in Congress. If you look at Senator Charles Schumer, the Democrats' leader in the Senate, his approval rating is now 17%. Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrats' leader in the House of Representatives, his approval rating is 20% across the board. Approval rating of the Democrats writ large is at the 38% mark. And also, I think it's important to get onto your second question to underscore that among his Make America Great Again faithful, there is not much indication currently of a diminution of support, which is why Republicans up on Capitol Hill have largely been supine over the last 100 days. They're not standing up to him on many issues. They're not being called on to do very much by him, which is part of the story here, you know, the expansion of executive power that he's engaged in. And it would take, I think, his popularity to turn completely among the Republican Party faithful before Republicans up on Capitol Hill found the courage to say, we need to do something about this. We need new leadership at the top. And I don't think there's any indication of that happening at all. He is the dominant force in this modern, reconstructed Republican Party, promulgating an entirely new orthodoxy that his supporters all rally to. And unless and until that changes, the Republicans on Capitol Hill, even those that are holding their nose, are basically stuck with him, and they feel that they have to bend the knee and pledge fealty to him because they're worried that if they don't, he and his good friend Elon Musk could spend enormous amounts of money trying to unseat them and replace them with even more pliant members of the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Just on that, Irish Paul, sorry, it's now gone from my screen. I'll see if I can retrieve that and find it in a moment. Oh no, here we are again. No, it's gone. Right, we'll take a break and come back to Simon Marks in just a few moments' time. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
You can watch us on Global Player if you would like to, as well as listen to us wherever you're listening to us right now. And Simon Marks is here answering your questions. If you'd like to ask him one, 0345 6060 973. Now, Irish Paul, just on the back of that last call from Elliot, Simon, Irish Paul says the Democrats are being all quiet on purpose. It is a strategy. If it is a strategy,
well, it is a strategy.
It's an odd one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a strategy, and it's a strategy that's devised by the veteran political strategist James Carville, who back in February wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times that he conceded was advocating what he called the most daring political manoeuvre in the party's history. He said Democrats should play dead, allow the Trump administration to crumble from within, and then Democrats could come forward and remind the American public how much they have missed the Democratic Party. So it is absolutely a strategy, and there are many Democrats up on Capitol Hill going along with it. The problem with the strategy is that having spent all of last year, whether you were Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, telling the American public that democracy could not possibly survive another 4 years of Donald Trump's government, the idea that Donald Trump wins the election and returns to power, and then you've got absolutely nothing to say to the American public, not even attempting to offer the notion of a path back to anything approximating normalcy, much less insisting, I know how to get there, I'll lead the way, is, I think, for many Democrat supporters, deeply, deeply disappointing. So we're beginning to see the first stirrings of internecine warfare within the Democratic Party, a younger generation of Democrats in some cases, personally confronting James Carville and saying, you were wrong. The party needs to stop listening to you. The younger generation of Democrats now need to take the reins from people like Nancy Pelosi, even from the Obamas, from Kamala Harris, and move on. And I suppose the apostle of change, and there are 2 or 3 out there, but the principal one is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the 35-year-old firebrand left-winger from New York, who has been taken on the campaign trail by Bernie Sanders, the old socialist warhorse from Vermont, and is basically being set up by Senator Bernie Sanders for a presidential run. And they have been playing to packed crowds of supporters, even in die-hard Republican states, and arguing that the party needs to show a sign of life, to show that there is some kind of activity that is possible to prepare the way for a post-Trump reality. But there's no question that you're right. It is a strategy devised by James Carville, and we will see whether the strategy pays off or whether the youngsters in the party say, enough of this, we really need to shake a leg and get going here.
But are there more moderate voices coming to the fore? Because, I mean, AOC, as she's known, I mean, she'll appeal to the left-wing fringes of American society. But what about mainstream voices? I mean, people like, Pete Buttigieg, he was seen as a great hope in the past. Is he saying anything?
Yeah, he's been saying a bit, not vast amounts, but he gives the occasional interview to Fox News. You're right about AOC. I mean, her argument, and Bernie Sanders, is that Donald Trump is delivering America into the hands of billionaire oligarchs, and that has to be stopped in its tracks in the interests of working class voters all over the country. I mean, there are other voices out there. Senator Cory Booker, you may remember that a few weeks back he engaged in that 25-hour record-breaking speech on the floor of the Senate. And what was so notable about that speech was not just that Cory Booker was putting himself out there as a possible future leader, the senator from New Jersey, but that at the heart of his speech, he apologized to the American people. And he said, the Democrats, I've let you down. The Democrats have let you down. We as a party now need to get on with the business of leading people to a path out of Trump world. So there are definitely other voices out there. Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, also has been fairly active. But what's been astonishing, I think, to people is the relative silence from the Bidens. Kamala Harris made a speech here, I think, yesterday. It's only the second speech she's made since the election. From Nancy Pelosi, from the Clintons. I mean, this sort of sense that the party's permanent decision-making elite is absolutely sitting on its hands. And it's into that vacuum that the younger generation is now rushing.
Right, let's take another question from Peter in West Hampstead. Peter, hi.
Hello, Ian. Quite a likely scenario is that the Supreme Court makes a judgment on an issue that is of crucial importance. I'd like to ask Simon, who then implements this? And if Trump steps in and vetoes it on the grounds that the president is all supreme, what then can happen?
What scenario are you thinking of?
It could be anything at all. I don't want to be too specific, but something that matters. If the Supreme Court orders it and Trump steps in and says, the people have voted for me, the president...
All right, Simon.
It's an absolutely great question, Peter, and I think it's frankly the story of the second 100 days, and Donald Trump covets it. He is desperate for the Supreme Court to rule on a number of issues. I mean, there's one already before them, birthright citizenship, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. Anybody who's born here, virtually anyone who's born here, has the right to claim American citizenship. Trump wants to overturn it. And that's one issue that could see a Supreme Court ruling pretty early on. I think it's also highly likely that mass deportations are also going to rise to the level of the Supreme Court. We saw, incidentally, a judgment today by a federal judge down in Texas who says that he is permanently banning, at least in Texas, the Trump administration from using the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, this obscure 18th century law that they've cited, as the justification for deporting people from the United States without giving them any due legal process whatsoever. That kind of an issue absolutely can rise to the level of the Supreme Court and almost certainly will. And the big question that is unanswered here is what happens if Donald Trump he doesn't even have to veto it, if he just ignores it, if he just says, it's very interesting to hear what the Supreme Court has to say. I disagree. I was sent here with a mandate to do all of these things, mass deportations, end birthright citizenship, anything else that was on his agenda. And if he just simply ignores it, then what happens? And it's very unclear that very much would happen. I think one of the shocks that everyone here has suffered over the last 100 days is the realization that the rule of law only obtains if the people in government accept that the rule of law has a role constitutionally to play. We know he's not particularly interested in working with Congress as he superannuates the powers of the executive, but is he going to adhere to any of the judicial rulings that have gone against him? There's other issues. Just last week, the shutdown of the Voice of America was deemed illegal by a judge. Well, we haven't seen any moves to rehire all those people from Voice of America and put the broadcaster back on the air. So they are already ignoring lower court rulings. What happens if they do the same with the Supreme Court? That ultimately could be the story of the future of America. Does it remain in any sense a democracy, or do all of those constitutional guardrails simply melt away?
I'll bring this up. I'm sure somebody might bring it up in the next half an hour, but it relates to what you've just been saying. The idea that Trump could get a third term. Now, that's specifically ruled out by an amendment to the US Constitution after Roosevelt, he got elected for a fourth time, I think, didn't he, in 1945, and then died shortly afterwards. Donald Trump keeps hinting that he's got a way around this. And presumably, if there is a way around it, it would be challenged in the courts.
Yes, absolutely. And it would be challenged, of course, by the Democratic Party, who would seek to stop him from running again. But Steve Bannon, the president's on-again, off-again political advisor, keeps insisting that there are plans afoot to run Donald Trump again in 2028, and at least to challenge that 22nd Amendment to the US Constitution that says you can't do it. One plan that has been floated is this idea that Donald Trump will not officially seek another term in the presidency, but will run as vice president with J.D. Vance on the top of the ticket, someone else on the top of the ticket. They win the election, and as soon as the inauguration is over, the president then immediately resigns, and President Trump finds himself back in the Oval Office that way. I mean, there's a bit of a sort of a Vladimir Putin flavour to all of that, all of the dancing around. Sometimes Vladimir Putin is president, sometimes he's prime minister. They change the authority level in accordance with whichever role Putin has been filling at the time, and also change the constitution. They are definitely serious here. I mean, in exactly the same way as one, first thought that this idea of Canada becoming the 51st state or America taking over Greenland was a joke. That's not a joke. And this is not a joke. They are absolutely deadly serious when they say Trump 2028, and they mean Donald Trump for a third term in office. And that's a further indication that this is, I see The Economist is now describing it in these terms. I was doing so a few weeks ahead of them. This is a revolutionary government. This is not a government that has any interest in preserving any of the elements of the Constitution with which they disagree. And so, he's going to go for it if he can.
OK, Dave is in Broxbourne. Dave, hi.
Hi, Ian. Thank you. Simon, fascinating as always. I was just going to ask you a question on Trump's sort of general omnipotence, and is he truly omnipotent, or are there people in the background like Lutnick that are pulling the strings? And then probably the second question, depending on what your answer is there, if the latter is the case, what will it take to change the dynamic around, what we're seeing with Trump?
It's a great question, Dave. I mean, he's not truly omnipotent, although he'd like to be. I think he'd like the executive, the presidency, to have all-consuming power here in the United States, and he wants to get rid of those guardrails, Congress and the courts. In terms of whether he himself is the dominant force within the government, he's clearly the eye of the storm, as it were. He's absolutely the epicenter of his own administration, but he's also only ever as good as the last person he spoke to. So, in the case that you cited, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, he is one of the principal architects of Donald Trump's tariff policy, the trade war, along with trade advisor Peter Navarro. And when you hear Donald Trump waxing lyrical about the 1890s and the 1900s, when America financed its entire government out of tariff revenues and there was no such thing as federal income tax, you know that Donald Trump has just been talking either to Lutnick or Navarro. When Donald Trump flips the coin and is talking instead not about a permanent trade war, but about negotiations with China, with Rachel Reeves, with countries all over the world to reduce the tariff burden, then you know he's just been talking to Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. And so there are differences of opinion within the Trump administration that at the moment he's absolutely tolerating. The difficulty is, I think it's never quite clear what his own final decision is about any issue. That's why I was saying, this Ukraine agreement that's been signed, it is not clear to me that Donald Trump truly understands what's in it, because the Donald Trump who has been demanding that Ukraine repay the United States $350 billion, which is the false amount he claims falsely that Ukraine owes, well, that's not the same Donald Trump whose government has just signed an economic cooperation pact that is designed to show the Russians that the US and Ukraine are going to be intimately involved in economic development for decades to come. What happens largely hinges on how long some of these competing figures survive in government. But because Donald Trump has appointed loyalists, I mean, I think, Dave, if you saw that televised cabinet meeting yesterday, which was positively North Korean, all of these cabinet officials lining up to pour praise all over the President of the United States. In surrounding himself with those figures, he has surrounded himself with people who are not particularly likely to spark a confrontation with him. And that, of course, augments his own power.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks for your question. We'll have more from Simon in just a few moments' time. Lots of questions coming in. Please feel free to add to them. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:32. News headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
President Trump has confirmed US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz is to leave his post. He's instead being appointed ambassador to the UN. A teenager's been arrested after a 14-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy was seriously injured in a stabbing in Merseyside. Armed police were called to Kirby shortly after 8 o'clock last night. Harrods has become the latest high-profile retailer to reveal it's the victim of a cyber attack. The luxury department store says it's restricted internet access across its sites as a precautionary measure. LBC weather, a cool night in the north, largely dry in southern areas, a low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34 on LBC. It's Question Marks with Simon Marks. He's in Washington. I'm in London. Alan's in Fulham. Alan, hi. What would you like to ask?
Hello. I'd like to ask a question about jobs, new jobs in the United States. The Economist recently published block graphs showing the figure for new jobs created of all the recent presidents during their period in the White House, with Bill Clinton leading the pack. I'd like you to make a prediction. What do you think the figure will look like for Trump when it comes for him to leave the White House and return to public life?
I think, Alan, and I'm not trying to make an excuse here, I think it's really difficult to project that because it's all going to hinge on just how committed Donald Trump is to this trade war. Donald Trump's notion is that he can continue waging a trade war on countries internationally, and that the country won't see inflation, but instead will see vast amounts of job creation because companies will realize that they need to stop producing goods overseas and start producing goods here in the United States. That's why he held his 100-day rally in Michigan, the headquarters of the American automotive industry, but also a key Rust Belt state where manufacturing has largely declined. Now, most economists argue that that is going to take years to occur, if it ever occurs, and that the downside risk of the tariffs is that they're going to propel America into a recession that would therefore see job growth that Donald Trump is promising in those Rust Belt states not occur at the pace at which Trump is projecting over the next 4 years, but instead be substantially slowed by the impacts of recession and inflation. And we're already seeing in some industries a downturn. Look at the travel sector, for example. Hotels, airlines, all reporting lower degrees of activity than they had anticipated. Some food retailers are also saying that they are seeing changes in public behaviour, a downturn in consumption. We saw the contraction of GDP by 0.3% in those figures that were out yesterday. So if he sticks to the tariffs, he may not secure the kind of job growth that he envisages. But if he negotiates away the tariffs and finds a way of putting his more protectionist instincts to one side, the US economy was certainly growing at a pretty reasonable clip in the final months of Joe Biden's tenure. I mean, one of the extraordinary things about this trade war is that it's a completely elective trade war that Donald Trump is waging. So we saw, 228,000 new jobs here created in March, which was better than economists anticipated. But the fear now is that those new jobs that are being created will slow down as supply chain issues hit the United States, as inflation hits the United States, and as the trade tariffs really begin to bite. So I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to what the number's going to look like, simply because he is so unpredictable and volatile that it's very unclear if he's going to stay on the course that he's currently on, as Navarro and Lutnick are advising him, or if he's going to start listening to people like the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who say this is not sustainable, his words, and you've got to negotiate these trade tariffs away.
Alan, thank you very much for your question. Mike says, we don't hear much over here about the state level of US politics. Simon, how much of the gubernatorial Republicans are MAGAs versus the traditional Republicans?
Well, gubernatorial Republicans are largely MAGA as well, not least because many of them sort of owe their careers to Donald Trump. If you look at Sarah Huckabee Sanders down in Arkansas, the former Trump press secretary in the first term, she would never be governor of Arkansas today had it not been for the fillip that she was provided by Donald Trump in terms of her career trajectory. And then, of course, in terms of his his political backing for her. Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, absolutely, completely MAGA through and through now, and has been pretty much since Donald Trump first burst onto the scene. But there are indications that in some states, public opinion is drifting away from Donald Trump, even among some Republicans, and particularly those Democrats that decided to vote Republican in the last election. So that has the potential to have impact. I mean, at the end of the day, governors are not likely to rise up against Donald Trump any more than members of Congress are for as long as he remains the dominant figure. And, you know, I do think for all the tsunami of activity, much of it irresponsible, that we've witnessed over the last 100 days, in political terms, you have got to admire the fact that he has kept the Republican Party in lockstep behind him. I mean, there's no sign of any meaningful dissent out there brewing, but we're only 100 days into this, and that means we've got 1,200 more to go.
Okay, James in air. Hello, James.
Yeah, hello there. Hello, Simon. It's nice to speak to you.
Hi, James.
My interests are in... Hi there. My interest is in the relationship between Donald Trump and the American Constitution. And the first question I was going to ask you, and I only get this question to ask you, is how realistic is it that Donald Trump could in fact stand for a third term?
Well, we sort of covered that 10 minutes ago.
As I say... Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think he really wants to. The Constitution, the 22nd Amendment, clearly stands in his way, but he's been up against insurmountable odds in the past, and they seem absolutely determined to try and find a way of running him again in 2028. I mean, I think more broadly, there is no... I mean, it's curious. You know, he has on the wall of the Oval Office a copy of the Declaration of Independence that he's put up there. It's been brought out from the archives. He keeps it behind a curtain and he shows it to visitors. They have to do that to protect it from the sunlight, and he shows it to visitors when they visit the Oval Office. But I can't say that he expresses very much reverence for the Constitution. And it's pretty clear that he is on a trajectory to challenge some of the core precepts of the Constitution, and particularly the amendments to it, including the 22nd Amendment that would prohibit him from seeking a third term in office. So I think, you know, the real history that we're witnessing here, the overarching question is, will the Constitution and its guardrails hold? The early indications are that they are certainly being challenged, in some regards melting away and not proving as strong as everybody thought. Will they survive? Are we going to get to 2028 and have a normal presidential election here with a real chance of the Democrats winning power back? Or are the Republicans going to find a way of gaming the system and making sure that the Donald Trump revolution, whether it's led by him or a successor, continues to dominate life and politics in the United States? And that is why I can't stop looking at what's happening here, and I suspect many people listening can't either.
Thank you very much for that, James. This is from Scott, who says, Simon, do you think Caroline Leavitt has a conscience? Some Scott in Adelaide.
Do I think she has a conscience? I mean, I think I'm not in a position to opine on whether she has a conscience or not.
She's a press secretary.
I think she is the White House press secretary, correct, absolutely. And far and away, I think she's 29, the youngest White House press secretary in history. She has, of course, been a Donald Trump spokesman throughout the last election campaign and has been at his side in Mar-a-Lago between the first and second presidential terms. I think that she is an extraordinarily articulate advocate for the president. She has an ability, I think, to summarize what he says and believes in ways that don't put her too far at risk of irking him. And I think she really has demonstrated that she is the yin to his yang. There are days when she willingly traffics in the same kind of disinformation that Trump is trafficking in on a daily basis. And I think one of the real complexities that we face here now is that more often than not, Donald Trump is making policy decisions based on disinformation, based on a false understanding of the facts or false claims that he makes about the facts. And she goes along with all of that. Now, whether she realizes the facts are false, whether she is simply a true believer, and there's no question about the fact that she is a fellow traveller with Donald Trump, I think that one can debate those things. I've never met her. I can't tell you whether she's got a conscience or not.
Talking of false claims, Simon, I'm afraid you just made one. She's 27, not 29.
27, even younger. 27. I can barely remember 27. Yeah. But I'm sure. I'm sure you can.
So many thoughts come to
well,
mind.
You're writing your autobiography, so you definitely.
Indeed. What was I doing at 27? I wasn't doing radio. I know that. Well. Right. More from Simon in just a moment. It's 8:45.
Today, ballot boxes are open across the country as voters have their say. Could the political landscape be about to shift? From 10 p.m, join me, Ben Kentish, for live election night coverage with Natasha Clark guiding you through the key moments, the early results, and what it all means for the big parties.
We'll have live reaction from all the major parties, expert analysis, and hearing from you as the story of the night unfolds.
Don't miss a moment. Join me, Ben Kentish, from 10 p.m.
Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It's 8:48. It's Question Marks with Simon Marks. He's in Washington. Stuart is very concerned for you, Simon. He says, does Simon feel his US work visa is at risk given his open and accurate reporting of the facts? And, of course, his cutting wit towards Mr. Trump and those he surrounds himself with.
Cutting wit. I've been called worse. Well, I
think
just to be clear,
T,
Stuart,
wasn't it?
Just to be clear, I don't actually have a work visa here. I am a permanent legal resident of the United States. I've got what they call a green card, and constitutionally enjoy, as a result of the green card, the same protections that American citizens are supposed to enjoy here. However, as you will have noticed, the Trump administration has not hesitated to take action against some green card holding students who participated in those pro-Palestinian demonstrations on university campuses all over the country. Whether you agree or disagree with those protesters, is an expression of free speech guaranteed by the First Amendment of the American Constitution. And yet, some green card holding residents here have been rounded up by the government and earmarked for deportation. It's possible, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said, that he will cancel green cards. So, under normal circumstances, I would say to you that I have no concerns whatsoever, but we do not live under normal circumstances. But equally, I will tell you that I have not felt pressured in any way, shape or form in terms of my reporting, which I do in exactly the same way as I've done it every single day for the last 40 odd years, and will carry on doing that for as long as it is possible to do that here. I do think there are concerns now about the ability of journalists to engage in their craft. The Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, last week issued a new memorandum to all employees at the DOJ. Didn't get very much attention, should have got a lot more, saying that she was rescinding protections that had been put in place by the Biden administration, particularly for investigative journalists here. And I think it's pretty clear that journalists are becoming to find themselves in the Trump administration's crosshairs. But, we'll see what happens.
Right, let's go to Shuvik in Orpington. Hi, Shuvik.
Hello, Ian. I'd like to ask Simon, does Trump want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, particularly regarding the healthcare situation in the US?
Well, that was certainly what the Republicans were planning to do as part of their Project 2025 manifesto. But as ever, when it comes to healthcare in the United States, the question is, what are you going to replace it with? And for the Trump administration to literally scrap Obamacare, as it's known here, you would have millions of Americans potentially finding themselves without health insurance, a move that would rapidly prove extremely unpopular for the Trump administration. So I think it's very unclear exactly in which direction they are going to go in that regard. It will always be in a direction that is beneficial to the health insurance companies here, which have massive lobbying efforts right here in Washington, D.C., literally a block from where I'm sitting on K Street, which is the street that is the capital of the lobbying industry in the United States. So there's no indication of immediate action that I've seen on that particular front, but they're certainly hostile to it. They believe, as you know, in the free market, and they believe in Americans taking responsibility for the situations in which they find themselves. I mean, in a related way, they've just announced that they're going to force people with student loans here to start meeting the repayment terms of those loans, which have largely been disregarded over the last several years. So they are moving to cement some of these plans in position. But what they do with the Affordable Care Act, which of course will require congressional action, is going to be a subject, I think, of pretty hot debate between Donald Trump and Republicans up on Capitol Hill.
Shuvik, thank you. Anthony's rung in from Ashford. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Simon. The question I got for you is, if Keir Starmer was able to wangle a knighthood for Donald Trump, who would then become Sir Donald, would that give him extra leverage with the trade deal and Ukraine?
He's probably kept something in his back pocket, don't you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I do.
Look, there is no question that Donald Trump was beguiled by the Prime Minister's invitation for that historic second state visit to the UK. And as you know, President Trump says that's going to happen in September. Whether the British government is ready for that to happen in September or not, Donald Trump certainly thinks that is when it is going to occur. I mean, could they offer him a knighthood? Yeah, I suppose of course they could. But I think there's a bigger question here, which is, for how much longer can the British government argue that there are shared values that tie the US and the UK together in a way that doesn't mean that Donald Trump is a fundamental threat to the transatlantic alliance. What's going to happen in terms of these efforts to secure some kind of a trade agreement between the US and the UK, some kind of economic cooperation pact? And how long does Keir Starmer continue to trust Donald Trump to be as good as his word? And I think that's going to be enormously problematic and challenging for the Prime Minister, for Lord Mandelson, the British ambassador here, and frankly for all the other European leaders who are trying to make up the same viewpoint. I mean, we saw Mark Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, this week basically declare that the traditional Canadian relationship with the United States is at an end, that there is no returning to it, that Canadians now have to accept that bilateral relationship is on a very different trajectory. And, you know, it seems to me that if that's the position the Canadians are taking, it won't be long before European governments find themselves poised to take the same position.
Thank you very much indeed, Anthony. I hesitate to read this one out, but I suppose I have to. Steve Bott says, please let Simon Marks know that I could listen to his voice and eloquent tones all night long.
Well, that's very kind of you, but we won't inflict that on you.
No. John's in Hammersmith. Hello, John.
Hi. The Chinese Communist Party has recently unfurled a flag on a sandbar in the West Philippine Sea, claiming it as Chinese territory. At the same time, which is, the Philippines, of course, is a U.S. ally, at the same time they have towed fish farms and an oil rig into the economic zone offshore of South Korea. It seems clear that the Chinese Communist Party intends to support the Russian Federation in their ongoing attack on Western democracy. And given Mark Rutte's comments about Russia's attack on NATO in 2 years, echoed by several of the intelligentsia, it seems that we're heading for a conflict in which the United States will play a significant part. What is the general mood and acknowledgement of that within the United States? And can we in the rest of the world rely on the United States to honor their treaty obligations?
Well, I'd like to say that the answer to that question is a simple yes, but I don't think that the answer to that question is necessarily yes. I think one could also add to the hopper what happens if China decides that it's time for Taiwan to be returned to mainland control. I mean, it is not clear that these treaty obligations, whether they are in Asia, whether they are in Europe, wherever they are obligations that the Trump administration views as inviolable. And while there is no question that there is much more talk among Republicans on Capitol Hill about some of the events that you've delineated there, and also concern about Taiwan, it's not immediately apparent that Donald Trump sees things the same way, and that his sort of transactional way of doing things could lead you to a position where he says, OK, I mean, we don't hear very much from him, for example, about the importance of freedom of navigation exercises by the United States Navy in those waters, not to the same extent that we heard about them from President Joe Biden. You could get to a situation where President Donald Trump argues that there's a transaction to be done. If China wants to seize some of this terrain, if it wants to take Taiwan, if it wants to advance its interests in the South China Sea, well, Donald Trump might say, I'll turn a blind eye to that if you'll turn a blind eye to me annexing Greenland or planting the stars and stripes on the sands of the Gaza Strip. I mean, that's why I think it is really important, not to dismiss these kind of notions that at the time seemed crazy. You know, the Canadians at first thought the idea that Canada might become America's 51st state was just a joke that Donald Trump was telling. These are not designed to be humorous. These are serious ideas and plans that he has, And if he finds himself in a situation where he can carve the world up with President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin, he may be tempted to do that. It's not clear that this American president is necessarily going to honour to the letter those treaty obligations.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. Simply Fab Hour, says John. That's down to you, Simon, not me. Thank you very much. We'll do this again sometime very, very soon. But coming up after the news, we're going to talk about the residents of the Mallorcan, is it Mallorcan or Majorcan town of Soler? They've launched a new campaign to warn tourists of their impact on the communities they visit and urge them to stay away. This is happening, I think, in more and more places, particularly in around the Mediterranean. I think on the Amalfi Coast is experiencing a similar phenomenon where there are simply too many tourists coming to their area, and the local residents are fed up with it. Are you a local resident who's fed up with the tourists coming to your area? Are the warnings about the effects of mass tourism making you rethink your holiday plans? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Donald Trump's confirmed his national security advisor's leaving his post. Mike Waltz is being moved to the job of UN ambassador weeks after he inadvertently added a journalist to a chat in which officials discussed planned military strikes in Yemen. During a White House event earlier today, Mr. Trump pointedly praised other members of his cabinet, including his under-fire defence secretary.
Great people that are here. Pete Hegseth, who's doing a fantastic job. Pete, thank you. Marco Rubio, unbelievable. Unbelievable, Marco. When I have a problem, I call up Marco. He gets it solved.
Volodymyr Zelensky says a deal giving the US access to Ukraine's minerals resource is a true